Night School.
Night School.
Been a minute.
Mm-hmm.
We're renovating the studio. There's a bunch of books on the wall behind us. Pretty soon we're going to have a book wall as our backdrop when we're recording.
Mm-hmm.
But we're half done, so we're just sticking with this for now. Okay, so I read this book called No Bad Parts, Healing Trauma and Restoring Wholeness with the Internal Family Systems Model by Richard Schwartz. To connect this to an earlier episode, we read a book called Hillary Hendel, It's Not Always Depression, called It's Not Always Depression by Hillary Hendel.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
she referenced the 7 C's of consciousness.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, so she borrowed those from this guy. And so AEDP was, that's her model of conducting therapy. Her therapeutic philosophy is inspired by this model.
Mm-hmm.
And but he actually has 8 C's. I think it was creative that she took out of that model. And then the rest were clear, confident, courageous, calm, curious, connected. Is that 7?
I think it was 6, but I don't know.
Yeah. And then one more, and then creative.
'Kay.
So I got this book from a friend named Matthew. He was and still is a therapist at Lutheran Community Services, where I did peer support a few years ago.
Okay.
He told me, like, probably 5 years ago, I was leaving that job, and he told me, like, hey, if you ever need anything, give me a call. So I called him, like, 5 years later. I'm like, hey, dude, I really need to talk to a therapist right now, and I don't have the money. Like, you remember what you told me 5 years ago? And he was like, yeah, hell yeah.
Nice.
So, pretty nice guy.
Very cool.
He's the mental health counselor at the Juvie, at Juvenile Justice Center for Benton County.
Yeah.
And so I went and picked him up from work on like a lunch break, chatted with me for an hour, gave me this book. And he, I think, was partially inspired to give me the book because I told him that I was interested in journeying within to try to work out the various aspects of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I call the tools that I use yoga nidra or self-hypnosis or meditation or shamanic journeying. These are descriptions that various cultures at various times have given to the process of diving into your own psyche, turning your awareness inside out, in on itself, so that you can explore your inner experience. And it's a really powerful tool. But after reading this book, I realized that a lot of the approaches that I had to those various aspects of myself could be counterproductive.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the best thing that I learned from this book. The central philosophy of the book is that every conscious entity is filled with a community of conscious entities, and each of those entities are filled with a community of conscious entities. So the psyche is made of parts, and those parts are made of parts, and those parts are made of parts. And so the main myth, and I really liked this about the book. He went out of his way a little bit to just kind of dispel myths that contradict his theory. And I think I agreed with him every single time he did that. There was some political commentary that I was just like, I don't feel like this adds anything to the book. Like he like psychoanalyzed politicians, and it's like, oh, this person obviously has this kind of trauma and this, and I was like, I didn't care for that part.
I get you.
Yeah, that's the only thing I didn't dig about the book. It just seemed kind of out of the way and irrelevant. But like all of the commentary that he had on the philosophy of how the mind is structured, I agreed with. And one of the myths that he was dispelling is he called it the mono-mind theory. This is that the mind is just one whole undivided unit.
Okay.
And so, if somebody does something bad and you categorize them as bad because you've observed them doing something bad, whether you claim to believe it or not, you're participating in the mono-mind myth.
That makes sense. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like, oh man, what the hell is the part of that person that did that? Like, what is going on there?
Right. It's just that person's a piece of shit.
Right.
That person bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even if you project perfection on somebody, and like that's a good person.
True.
And that's a bad person.
Right.
That's mono-mind nonsense. People aren't built that way.
Right. There are aspects of us that are capable of good or bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Clearly. Yeah. We all experience that. That's true for all of us experientially. And even though Richard Schwartz is pretty strict about sticking to the practical application of his theories rather than the metaphysical implications, I couldn't help but go there. And so it's influenced my my Christology, my understanding of what the Christ is and how that relates to our human experience. Even though he's not a Christian and he's really critical of Christianity in all ways that I agree with, it made me a deeper Christian to read this book. One of the myths he dispels about Christian thinking is that Christians tend to believe that the human is fundamentally corrupted and bad. I remember...
Yeah, that seems true. Yeah,
Right.
the world just ruined us.
Yeah, we're just, hey, man, we were born and we just absolutely suck. And if we believe in...
Just as soon as we touched the world,
we
we started sucking.
Right. And because the world sucks and we suck. And a lot of mainstream Christian theology can be really monomind oriented too. But at least they have a monomind. So in a lot of Christian theory, there's a monomind, but that monomind is acted upon by forces that are good and forces that are bad. So that means if anything in you drives you to do something bad, you go, get out in the name of Jesus,
Right.
go away.
Right.
It's like, man, thinking about, and it's so interesting where all of the lines are drawn in this whole picture because I still believe that it's possible for demonic possession and exorcism to exist, but certainly there are going to be a lot of times throughout your life when something in you drives you to do something bad, and that part of you is a lost, sick, needy aspect of yourself that's reaching out to you for validation and understanding and nurturing. And my experience in Christian churches is that hasn't often been met that way. That it's usually like, hey, if you ever feel tempted to watch porn, just grab that thought and just punch it in the face. It's like, well, so yeah, I don't know where the line is there between what's how those spiritual phenomena work, but
Or it's possible. I mean, it's possible that there's not really that much of a line at all, and that in some way it's just like we are all made up of entities, and some of those we label as demons, but the whole world is made up of different entities at different levels.
right.
And we identify some of them.
One of the Christian myths that he works on dispelling is that humans are fundamentally bad, and one of the Buddhist myths that he works on dispelling is that there's something fundamentally bad about the ego, that the ego is an aspect of the self that is stupid and deluded, and that must be harshly disciplined and transcended
By ego here, we're meaning like ego as in your identity as a human being, not like pride, right?
Dude, it's really hard to say. It is truly hard to say what any particular person means when they say ego.
Right.
He's referring to the form in which... So, I mean, one Buddhist teacher could say the goal is to discipline and transcend the ego. And what they might mean is that fundamentally identifying as someone that exists rather than fundamentally identifying as someone who exists as that individual entity is the goal. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I don't think Richard Schwartz would think that either. Like, I fundamentally exist. I fundamentally am a created being. And secondarily, I exist in this particular form. I don't think Schwartz was saying there's anything toxic about that. But another Buddhist teacher could say the ego is the stupid aspect of yourself that believes in the illusion that you are an individual being, and that needs to be beat up and transcended. That's toxic, and I think Schwartz would agree with this. First, because whatever is trying to demand your attention when you're trying to meditate is a part of yourself that you're damn well responsible for. And you should listen to it like it's your kid, not like it's someone who's interrupting your meditation that is some kind of enemy, because it's a part of you. And spiritual practice is about resolving the war within, reconciling the various aspects of the self to become whole, not about militantly beating any aspects of yourself into submission. And second, and I don't know if Schwartz agrees with this or not, but it is illusory that you are fundamentally an individual being, but it is not illusory that you are an individual being.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Yeah, it's illusory that you are fundamentally an individual being.
Okay.
but it is not illusory that you are an individual being.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
For sure. As in the difference being that we originate elsewhere, not here. Now.
Right.
This is not all we are. We're something else.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what are you? I'm awareness, but I'm awareness that's currently in the form of Travis, and I'm happy to be awareness, and I'm also happy to be Travis. Like, that's, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but Schwartz's main point wasn't that. Schwartz's main point was that demonizing an aspect of the self by calling it the ego.
Or by calling it a demon, yeah.
Or by, probably that too, yeah. And I'm really curious. I don't want to get too far into the metaphysical implications of IFS because I so want to go there that I will. So I'm going to try not to, and I still will. But at least I'll do it an appropriate amount, maybe. You're
saying let's try not to talk about demons too much?
Yes, okay. I'm saying let's please try not to talk about demons too much.
Okay, ghosts.
However, ghosts we're not going to touch.
Okay.
But I will say another thing about demons, and I get to have the last word on this because it's my episode.
Deal.
So I am curious whether what Christ was doing was healing demons or sending them somewhere that was bad. I'm very curious about that. My intuition doubts that he was really sending them to prison. I'm curious whether he had the authority to release them into the light of God or resolve them or reconcile them to the divine in some way. But that's a standing question,
Yeah, that does sound like an interesting thread, though.
Yeah. So that's a thread I'll go down eventually. But
sounds like an AC.
Yeah, something like that. I don't think the mics will pick it up though. Evan was just asking what that noise was. The war on crime and the war on drugs are an example of of one of these myths that Richard Schwartz is dispelling. Like the myth that what you should do about individuals who are committing crimes or individuals who are using drugs is get them away from the rest and just put them in a box where all the bad ones go because they're bad. Like that human being is a bad cell. So put it in the bad place and just leave it there. It seems like humans are stuck with each other and are responsible for one another, responsible for healing and integrating one another. So that approach, it seems to be backfiring. Our recidivism rates are really appalling, and the percentage of our country that is in prison is really appalling. So it's like, this doesn't look like it's working all that great. And Schwartz's analysis of that is that it's a reflection of our false theories of consciousness. Like, we have the theory that if a person is bad, they are 100% bad. Or if a part of ourself is bad, then that part is 100% bad. And he doesn't feel that any of that is productive.
Right.
And I agree with him. So
yeah, that sort of monomind idea is enforced on a governmental level by the stamp of felon. Like, yeah,
exactly.
Right.
And the last myth that I wanted to mention is that aspects of the self are symbols. He holds that aspects of the self. Let me read this page real quick. Your inner world is real. Parts are not imaginary products or symbols of your psyche, nor are they simply metaphors of deeper meaning. They are inner beings who exist in inner families or societies, and what happens in those inner realms makes a big difference in how you feel and live your life. That's one of
the... So parts, is that was the term he used for these things?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he refers to them as parts, which is ironically not very personifying for somebody who believes that these parts are conscious and aware and have agendas and have feelings and everything.
Right.
It's kind of funny to call them parts because they're more than that. But from our perspective, that's how we think about them. It's at least a good place to start. I prefer capital S self for that aspect of you that transcends the various parts and is the sum total of that. I'll talk more about that a little bit later. And lowercase s selves for parts. I like selves better than parts because I feel that it honors their awareness more. So, okay, talk about some types of parts.
Okay.
So, and I'm going to honor his language for this presentation. So I'm going to use the term parts, not selves. So some of the common parts that you'll encounter if you start doing this work are, for example, protectors. So you could be, let's say you have a goal, right? And part of you wants to just not let anything hold you back and just go straight for that goal. But then Another part of you is trying to prevent you from achieving that goal. If it's something as simple as you've always wanted to have a routine of just jogging a mile every morning, and you feel like it takes 15 minutes and it makes me feel good, it's a good investment of time, why can't I just get myself to do it? So think about jogging every morning and then see what sensations come up. Like say, I'm going to jog every morning, and then see how your body responds and see where those response signals come from. They'll come from somewhere in the body. This was talked about in the AEDP model too, that which Hillary Handel wrote about. And actually,
body scan, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think she used the term body scan.
Yeah.
And also, I just wanted to briefly mention, she did not coin AEDP. I think maybe she did. Yep, she did. Never mind. She did make AEDP.
Okay. Listen to the episode if you're...
Or not.
if
yeah.
you want to confirm
the episode is called
saying.
Anxiety According to Hillary Handel, if anyone's curious. Yeah, it's a minor point. Either her or a direct mentor made it, but coined the theory. But anyway, the signal will come from somewhere in your body. So then you bring your awareness to that part of the body, and you start to communicate with it. And simultaneously in your imagination, you're generating an image that visually represents the kind of resonance that you're hearing from that part. So you might see
This is what he recommends here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This is his approach.
Okay.
So but it's also my own personal description of how it feels for me when I do it.
Okay.
Because
cool.
I did these practices as I read this book, and so if someone else reads this book and does these practices, they will describe them differently.
Okay.
So tune into that signal in your body as you imagine an image of what that part might look like if it were a person, and it's likely that it will look like you with the traits that represent it. So like it could look like you, for example, one of my parts that was like really difficult to confront, that was really sad and angry and self-pitying, and I, there's a lot to unpack there. It was sopping wet, and it was very, very skinny. So it was me if I was like 115 pounds and I was homeless and I was just in the rain, just drenched, and I was melting. So it looked like that because it was sad, because it felt defeated, it felt cold, it felt exposed to the elements, because it felt that it had been made vulnerable in situations where it would have preferred shelter. So you can just see, like, that's me unpacking it logically later and saying, oh, rain. So you wanted protection, but instead you were vulnerable and you're uncomfortable. You're cold as opposed to warm because you didn't feel nurtured. I can unpack that later, but in the moment, you just kind of intuitively understand why they look and appear the way that they do. Or they could appear super excessively macho. They could be really buff and tyrannical and have a scar across their whole face. So you pay attention to what they look like or what they sound like, and what the sensation is telling you, and then you can start communicate with it. So one of the good questions you would want to ask it is, what are you protecting me from? And it will respond almost every time. It will respond and tell you exactly what it's protecting you from. And then you can ask, when did you start protecting me from that? And it'll tell you, well, when this happened. You're like, damn, how do you feel about that? And it'll start venting to you, like, when this and this and this happened and I failed to protect myself. Like, do you know how that makes me feel? That now I have to have my guard up all the time because I couldn't fucking protect myself when it mattered. And they'll take on their own unique tone and demeanor and body language and everything as you have this conversation through your imagination. And I don't use the word imagination to imply something that isn't real, but just the internal experience. And then you want to ask it, what are you afraid would happen if you stopped protecting me from that? And it will tell you the outcome that it's trying to avoid. So to tie all this back into the jogging example, it might tell you that it's afraid of you. Maybe you got a knee injury and it's afraid of that happening again. Or maybe it's afraid that if you got in too good of shape, you would get arrogant. Or maybe it's afraid, I don't know, can you think of another example? Maybe it's afraid that people will look at you and think that you don't run in a cool way.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think that's probably often, like, a fear of other people's reaction to what you're doing.
Right. Or you're afraid that you'll make a commitment to yourself to jog for at least 30 days, but you'll jog for 2 and disappoint yourself, and you'd rather just not disappoint yourself.
Totally. Yeah, you're worried that you're going to let yourself down anyway, so why am I even going to bother? I know this guy's full of shit.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So then what if you're in the middle of the conversation with that protector, right, and it's given you all 4 of the reasons we just discussed, and you feel like you're getting somewhere, and then all of a sudden, spontaneously, you're afraid to continue the conversation. Then what do? you transcend that fear.
And when you say you are afraid to continue that conversation, you're referring to capital self you, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Not the aspect, the part of you that you're communicating with, but the part that is doing the communicating becomes afraid. What does that mean? Because the self doesn't experience fear. The self transcends all of that. So what does it mean that you have spontaneously become afraid? That another part has emerged, another part that is fearful. So then you tune into the fear that has emerged and you communicate that as though that's a part, and that separates from you, and you transcend that. You go, why are you afraid of me talking to this protector? And you start communicating with that. I'm gonna say more about what the self exactly means in that transcendent process a little bit later. But right now I want to get through a couple more part types. Mm-hmm. So the typical approach to the protector type is very similar to the typical approach to the manager part. So the manager part feels that if it doesn't boss other parts of you into being where they're supposed to be and doing what they're supposed to do, that something bad will happen. So you have a similar conversation with them. What are you protecting me from? What are you trying to manage me into or manage me out of, or us out of? What are you afraid would happen if you stopped barking all these orders all over the place? And imagine if we really got all of our inner managers on the same page, how much smoother things could go. Right. Because those managers contradict each other all the fucking time.
Right.
And so, because they're all afraid of everything going to shit. So they hide information from each other. They're hiding information and the big self doesn't know. So they're like hiding shit from each other. Like they're not even on the same, they're not aligned at all. Yeah, absolutely.
They're like not even, they're both connected to you, but not connected to each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so let me say a word about that actually. Just go on a quick tangent there. They're connected to you, but they're not connected to each other. Sometimes the problem is actually that parts are blended with each other, and what they need to be separated. So this was counterintuitive because isn't this whole process about integration? Integrating everything into a more cohesive whole, more coherent superorganism? Why would we want to separate the parts from each other? Why is it a problem that they're blended? And so I kind of meditated on that because that didn't make sense to me. And an example came to mind as I meditated on that. How do you integrate and reconcile science and religion? First and foremost, you clearly define what science is and what its limitations are. Then second, you clearly define what religion is and what its limitations are. Now that you have them separate, you can tell how they complement each other. Now you can begin to reconcile them. Mm-hmm. So for two things to be reconciled and integrated with each other, they have to first be separated. You have to distinguish them from each other completely. Mm-hmm. Say, you are just that, and you are just that. So now they can be more functional. Same thing in a relationship. Let's say you're running a company and two of your employees are dating, and they're so codependent that it's impacting the issues at work. That's like two blended parts of a company. So if you were in the position to counsel them, you would first try to break the codependence so that they could each stand on their own as individuals, and then they would function together better. So,
sure, yeah.
so that's why you want to unblend parts. You want to separate them in order to integrate them.
Okay, yeah.
So to go back, a third part that you might encounter as a firefighter. So a firefighter, this hit home for me because I've had a lot of situations where I got in an interpersonal argument with a close person, whether pretty much just family or serious romantic relationship. Mm-hmm. I don't think even a friend could do this to me, but get so angry that I leave, get in the car, and just speed down the road. Out of the house, to the car, pull out, and just drive quickly. So that's an example of the manifestation of a firefighter part. Their job is to detect fire and just get you the hell out of there. And so, and that might not manifest as directly and literally for a lot of people as it does for me. Apparently I've got some pretty buff firefighters there that need some serious nurturing. Mm-hmm. But for other people, it could be other kinds of avoidance. And you might communicate with, oh, what is that avoidance? So you communicate with that, and it might tell you there's an emergency going on. Do you not realize there's a fucking emergency going on? And you're like, bud, like, tell me why you feel like there's an emergency going on. Because those parts that you're communicating with, they don't necessarily live where you live. Mm-hmm. one of the things you can do to detect whether they're reacting to a past event or reacting to the present event is you can ask them how old they are, and they'll tell you how old they are. So if it is reacting the way that it is, or trying to grab the steering wheel of your awareness and manifest, through you, because of something that happened when you were 15. If you ask it how old it was, it'll tell you, we're 15. What do you mean? How old am I? We're the same. We're 15. And then you can kind of, like, one way that I might do this is touch their third eye, touch their forehead and say, see, and expand their awareness to see the present life that I'm living, where I'm a normal, healthy, safe 27-year-old, not the 15-year-old getting bullied or whatever it is. The third eye thing, that's just my own personal thing that has nothing to do with Schwartz model. But I'm just saying, use some way that resonates with you of revealing to that part of yourself what your present experience actually looks like. So you could say, can I take you on a tour, get in this car, put it in an imaginary car and drive it to your present life and say, bro, look around. Like, we're actually pretty safe. Like, things are pretty chill. So then a fourth type that's referenced quite a bit in the book is the exile. So this is a part that has been abandoned for so long that it's like a leper of your psyche. So there's a really interesting scene in the New Testament where Jesus is traveling with the disciples and a leper approaches them, and the disciples were not calm in that situation at all. You're talking about a zombie approaching you. To them, a sick human being, but like to them, that's, if that person touches me, not only can I get physically ill, but I can become a social outcast, and it can be permanent. Right. So it's like hell itself is walking up to you. So they were not cool. And Jesus says, oh, just wait. And he starts to approach the leper. And so Peter in particular gets threatening. Like, he's like, no, I'm going to protect you from this leper. And Jesus is like, you don't understand, and gets him to step aside and approaches the leper and heals him. So that's a process that happens in the psyche when you conduct IFS with yourself. An exile emerges. You try to approach the exile. Protector steps in, says, don't get near the exile. But you have the compassionate authority and the respect of the protector as the self to say, would you mind stepping aside and trusting me to handle this? Yeah. Because you know exactly what the fuck I am. Yeah. I am the very awareness of the organism that we both exist in. So trust me enough to step aside. And it's not about get out of my way. It's about, hey, I don't have to impose myself or get or speak in any tone but a compassionate one to ask you to move out of the way. Because why did Peter step out of the way? Because he understood that Jesus was something beyond, right? Right. It's the same thing when you're interacting with your parts. They understand. It's like, who are you? I'm Raleigh's anger. I'm Raleigh's shame. Really? I'm Raleigh. Right. We're not the same thing. I'm Raleigh. Look, listen to me. I'm Raleigh. You get it? So would you mind stepping aside for a moment? They'll be like, yes, sir. And if there's some additional resistance, then that just means maybe that part could be broken into additional parts. Like, okay, then instead of trying to talk to the shame, talk to the resistance that the shame has on the outside of it that prevents anybody from accessing it. Just talk to that part. Or, the resistance is actually attacking you and insulting you, so just talk to that aspect of the resistance. You could break it down more if something is particularly resistant with you, but maybe I've gotten lucky, or some of the practices that I've engaged in thus far have given me a leg up, but every single time I have asked a part of myself to do anything, it has immediately and respectfully obeyed. It's never been a problem because it looks at you like you are the transcendent. So, we already talked about the process pretty much because that's my next section of my notes. What exactly are you protecting me from? What happened to you? That's not your life anymore. You're not that age. You're this age. Another thing actually he says you can do is you can ask the part, is there anything that you want to see or do? And it might tell you like, yeah, actually, and you can take it on a field trip in your psyche. You can take it somewhere. You can take it to the beach, or some part of you that was bullied in middle school by girls that he had a crush on, and he feels like he will never get laid, and he has that like kind of that preteen insecurity. I'll never get laid.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, bro, you got laid. Let me show you. You bring it to those memories and be like, look. All that's going to happen. That's for another time. That's good. Don't worry about that. Let that be in the future, because look, it happens. Or it might even just be like, I have been in this fight as this protector or manager for so long. Can you just take me somewhere calm? You know?
Mm-hmm.
And you can just take it somewhere. So,
and like functionally, that would be just kind of imagining.
yeah.
And imagining you being there with that.
Yes.
Okay.
But there's a real alchemy that's happening there. There's a real alchemical process that's occurring in your psyche. There's a real transformation occurring.
Mm-hmm.
Because the aspect of you that can, I mean, the fact that you picture your inner peace in the form of a beach means that the beach might be a symbol or a personification or a kind of language with which you used language that you use to express the feeling of peace. But the fact that there is in your psyche a place of peace is real. And the fact that there's a place in your psyche that is a part that needs peace is real. And the fact that you have the authority and ability to bring that part to that place is also real.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not an imagination exercise that tricks you into feeling a little better.
Mm-hmm.
This is real healing occurring. And
for sure,
it's and this technology is really powerful, and you think, well, we would have figured this out by now. Yeah, we did. Every single continent, every single era has invented this technology.
Right. That's such a funny argument.
Right.
Well, if this was true, wouldn't you know? Yeah, I'm telling you. I'm telling you now. You're finding out.
Not only am I telling you, but people who barely knew how to fucking play with fire did shit like this.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Shamanic journeying has existed on every continent, and
Right.
it is a method of doing this. This is a really effective, no nonsense, no fat, just efficient way to describe how to do this that's really approachable to anyone in modern language. But shamanic journeying, yoga nidra, self-hypnosis, and meditation have existed for a long time, and prayer. And you know, to touch on prayer briefly, another Christian myth that I was thinking about, and I don't mean myths are a good thing. Christian stories are a good thing. They can be transformative. A Christian lie that I was thinking about is that when you hear something in your head that is wiser than you could imagine, that is God, and God is an entity that is separate from you, that is wiser than you could ever be. When you hear something in your head say something, it is a part of yourself. There is in your head the voice of God, but the voice of God is the self that is the awareness that we've been talking about throughout this exercise.
Mm-hmm.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I followed that.
Yeah, so like in the same sense that Jesus took it upon himself, considered it his responsibility to reach out to all the various exiles and whatnot of the earth and invite them into a greater whole. In that same sense, you have that responsibility to yourself. And so it's like Christ, I know I'm kind of jumping around right now, but there's this theological position called panentheism. It's a hybrid between monotheism and pantheism.
Oh, so you think pan-and-theism?
No, panentheism. So it's Panentheism,
Okay.
one word. So pantheism theorizes that God is the totality of all creation. Mm-hmm. So if you add up all creation, this cell plus this one times a million trillion, that's God. He's the sum total of everything. Monotheism holds that there is one God that is a supreme creative intelligence that transcends all of creation, that lives on the outside of it, that transcends it. Panentheism holds simply that God is both of those. And so...
Okay.
And so that's my personal theological position, and I think that it would be Schwartz as well, because what is the self exactly? Like, what is the self of Raleigh? Well, I could say that's Raleigh's arm, that's Raleigh's chest, that's Raleigh's forehead, that's Raleigh's headphones. Well, it's a bad example. It's not on your body. But you know what I mean? And then, or I could say that's Raleigh. Mm-hmm. So Raleigh, the name I have for the self that is you, is the sum total of all that you are. Mm-hmm. But also, when you reach within and talk to Raleigh's anger or Raleigh's resentment or Raleigh's impatience, it's Raleigh that's speaking. So Raleigh is So everything within you is Raleigh.
Mm-hmm.
But Raleigh is a concept that transcends every aspect of Raleigh. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure. Yeah.
so everything in you is Raleigh.
Yeah.
But you're not, how do you say? You are greater than the sum of your parts. You're greater than the sum of your parts.
Sure.
Like if you laid out every cell in your body and somehow laid out all of the space and ether and dark matter and whatever the hell really makes you up physically, all on the floor, that's not Raleigh. But if you organize it in this certain way, it becomes a greater than the sum of its parts. A car, it's greater than a pile of car parts because it has a function.
Totally.
So Raleigh is greater than the sum of its parts. We use words that are a little more spiritual because it feels fancy. As we say, you have a purpose rather than you have a function.
Mm-hmm.
But still, he's greater than the sum of his parts because he has something to do, and because he as a collective entity is, you get what I'm saying.
Totally.
So Christ, he would say that he was the Son of Man, and then he would also say that he is the Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been interested in what exactly that means, and it's also always interested me that the church brushes over the Son of Man part so much. Like, God sent his Son, Jesus Christ, the perfect manifestation of the divine, to the earth to do all the shit he was going to do. What does it mean that he's the Son of Man? Well, you are that which transcends and is the Lord of all of your parts, but you also are a product of all of your parts, because all of the various parts have given birth to your total being in its current form. So Raleigh, the self, is the product of all of the parts and the Lord of all of the parts. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's like Jesus, if he was that self of the collective consciousness of the human species, it would make sense to say, I am the sum of all humans. And I am something that transcends all humans. So I am the Lord of humans. So like it would make sense to me that he would say, I am the Son of God and I am the Son of Man. It's like the collective species, the collective consciousness of the human species gave birth to Jesus, or Jesus emerged in the human species at a certain point, in the same sense that everybody has this weird moment where I think for girls it can happen around 11 to 13, and I think for men it can happen like more in the mid to late teenage years, where you just have this weird moment where you go, I'm aware. Like I'm having an experience. And there's just this awareness of awareness that spontaneously emerges, where it's almost like the self opens its eyes. And it's like, I'm no longer just a mass of impulses and instincts and agendas and cravings in this tornado of biology. I've just kind of become aware. Even though you were aware the whole time, you weren't aware that you were aware. And so the human species...
you recall feeling that?
Yeah.
You're saying that you think that's probably like a moment in everybody's life?
Yeah. But I don't think that it's necessarily memorable because it's so natural to the human experience.
Yeah.
I don't remember the specific moment when it happened to me, but I remember a distinction between being aware and being aware that I was aware. And the only point I'm trying to make there is that there's a certain point in the development of a conscious entity when the self emerges. And the Christian theory is that, not that most Christians would probably even agree with what I'm saying, but I think the Christian theory is that Jesus is that self, that Jesus represents the point in the development of humanity when awareness of awareness wakes up, when some aspect...
Ooh, that's interesting, yeah.
Yeah, like that's when that happened at the species level, and he is a model for each individual part within the greater human whole to mimic that process on itself. So we... as people who believe in Christ, we're not, I don't think that we're called first and foremost to go evangelize in the world. I think we're called first and foremost to evangelize in ourselves. Like, what does it mean to show that healing, understanding, nurturing love of Christ to each part of ourself that we can find? Because it's likely that coming to terms with every aspect of ourself will cause us spontaneously to have a sincere fondness of every individual that we encounter in the outside world.
Right.
You feel me?
I do. Yeah. I mean, it's very much like the idea of set your house in order before you criticize the world.
Exactly.
Like deal with align you first, and then
Yeah.
the ability to align the things around you either is elevated, or like your ability to align the things around you becomes elevated, or you become less concerned with aligning those things and like see them as something to be accepted and brought into the world rather as something to like fix. I don't know. I haven't done it, but
Right. Me neither.
but that feels like it makes sense.
Right.
And Jordan Peterson said it, so it
Right.
must be true.
Right. And he's currently lecturing every religion.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen those videos?
Wait, what?
He's making these videos that are like message to Muslims, message to Christians. And he's like, get your act together, you Shiites and Sunnis. It's crazy.
He released a podcast the other day called How Black Lives Truly Matter. It's like, what is that?
Like, there's a lot of things to watch. I love you, man. But, dude,
Time for all
it's
this.
it's so unfortunate to read his book Maps of Meaning and then see just like the meme career that is going on now where he's like roasting transgenders and models and everything. And I'm like, dude, this guy that wrote Maps of Meaning, like what I said earlier about reconciling and integrating science and religion first by defining each of them clearly, never know that if I hadn't read the first 10% of Maps of Meaning. Like I haven't even finished, I don't think I have finished a fifth of that book, and it fundamentally changed my understanding of what defines and limits both science and religion. And God, it's like, dude, now you're like yelling at people on Twitter.
Now he's a bad person. It is what it is. He's trash.
He's still great. But anyway, something else I wanted to touch on. Yes, he is suspended.
Yeah.
Also, I didn't know if you knew this, but we're shooting a podcast. So why don't you get a microphone, dude? Evan wants everyone to know that Jordan Peterson is banned from Twitter. We should make that the headline of this video. Jordan Peterson banned from Twitter.
Well, yeah, he threw a rock at Elliot Page.
Oh my God. Okay. Let me touch on another aspect of the metaphysical implications of this book. So he defined the self, the capital S self, not just as it manifests in the individual human psyche, but what the concept of the self as such means. And I was really, really impressed by how holistically he defined it. And I was like, man, because I've been studying the self for a couple years now in my undergrad program at MIU. It is a constant theme that we're dealing with. Mm-hmm. Christian conceptions of it, yogic conceptions of it, Jungian conceptions of it, Campbell's conceptions of it, Freud's conceptions of it. Like we drill the concept of the self, and having familiarity with that very abstract concept. As soon as someone starts talking about it, I'm like, fucking, here we go. Like I'm about to listen to like a professor of biology explain what consciousness is and how it's really just a product of blah, blah, blah. Right. I'm like, fuck, here we go, man. He starts describing the self, and I'm like, I feel like he took a fucking college degree on the self, and I'm like, damn, like this guy really gets this concept. And then he mentions that he did Transcendental Meditation for a few years. Mm-hmm. And that was really interesting because that's the style of meditation that I practice personally and study academically at MIU. And I'm like, interesting. That made me wonder how much of an influence Transcendental Meditation had on this model developing. Because without understanding the absolute invincibility of the self, there should be a lot of doubt in one's mind about one's own ability to heal one's own parts. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, of course.
Like, because you talk to a part, right, and you're going to get afraid. But then, and actually, let me go on another fucking random tangent. So, how do you know if you're operating as the self? How do you know if the role that you're playing in these imagination exercises is the self, or whether it's just a part? Are you a part talking to a part, or are you the self talking to a part? So he offers the 8 C's of consciousness, that's the letter C, not the oceans, as markers. If you currently possess all 8 of these qualities, you are likely operating from self. Now, that concept is strikingly similar to the concept of the fruits of the Spirit from the New Testament, because what they say essentially, what Paul wrote in one of his letters was, you know that you are possessed by the Holy Spirit if you have these traits. So he calls them the fruits of the Spirit. The Spirit is in you if your life produces these fruits. And so they're like patience, self-control, kindness, faith, hope, joy, gentleness, a couple of others. And I think it's like 9 maybe. So it's a similar amount of traits even. So, and if you look at those traits side by side, patience, gentleness, self-control, kindness, joy, faith, hope, clarity, courage, calmness, compassion, creativity, there you can see that they're both you can see that they're describing something really similar. They're describing this ideal state. Why is that state courageous, to use Schwartz's word, and faithful, to use Paul's word? Because it's aware of its own eternal nature. Like faith or courage, it's aware of its eternal nature.
Right. If you know you can't die, then you can't be scared of death.
Right.
Yeah.
Or lose your faith. I mean, faith in what? I'm eternal. Faith in faith in myself. What do I have to reference myself? I am myself. It's a source of faith, or it's a source of courage. And yeah, let me see which page, because he tells this crazy ass story about how he almost died. And how easily he was able to soothe himself in the moment, as he was pretty sure he was about to die. And it just made me think, like, this practice really can connect you to something in you that is so eternal and non-changing that it results in a kind of permanent faith and courage. He says, let's see, marked one page off. My wife, Jeanne, and I were visiting my brother and sister-in-law in their place in Hawaii. High surf. Despite Jean's warnings, I wade into the shallows of the ocean, assuming I'm safe. I unknowingly took a step off a drop-off and was suddenly in the middle of a riptide, pulling me quickly out to sea. Whoa. Not knowing any better, I tried to swim directly back to shore and got nowhere. I tried to rest by rolling on my back, but the waves washed into my mouth and I started choking. As I became increasingly fatigued, it began to dawn on me that I might not make it. Parts of me began screaming repeatedly in my head, "We're going to die." I was able to separate from them enough to let them feel me saying, "We might die, but I'll be with you as we do." And I sensed them calm down. Just when I was ready to give up, my sister-in-law arrived at the beach, saw me struggling, and pointed frantically for me to swim horizontally toward the huge waves. It was counterintuitive, but exactly what I needed to do to get back to shore. So to be able to, with no energy to spare, I gave it one last go, and I was carried in by the waves. So to be able to do something counterintuitive while under the threat of death shows a level of self-development that is not normal.
Right.
Because your instincts kick in and you do exactly what is intuitive. And his ability to soothe himself in the face of the threat of death speaks to how powerful that aspect of himself that he's accessing through this practice really is. He also describes meditation practices throughout the book that are based on his approach, because he says that it's okay to do breath meditation or mantra meditation or yoga or whatever if you're not bullying parts of yourself into letting you meditate. So if it's like something comes up to distract you and you go, whack, stop it, I'm meditating, and then you continue to your meditation, what you're really doing is using this pseudo-spiritual technique to neglect and abuse yourself to avoid your problems.
That's interesting.
There's nothing soundly spiritual about that. Because a practice is spiritual when it contributes to your psychological evolution and your emotional maturation, because you're trying to grow from a human to a spirit. You're trying to become more than human. You're trying to evolve. So if it's not evolving you and harmonizing you and unifying you and integrating you, it's not a spiritual practice. And so he's pretty critical of that. But one of the ways that he says to meditate without abusing or neglecting any aspect of yourself is imagine yourself standing at the bottom of a path with the various parts of yourself. So you're standing in a group with them, and you ask them if they're cool with you walking up that path alone and then coming back. And as long as there's no immediate firefighter level needs where they're like, dude, I really actually need you right now. They're like, yeah, that's fine. Like, it's going to be good for all of us. Like, if you go and have that experience and come back. And side note, Jesus also did this with the disciples. Hey, I'm going to go out and pray alone now. I'll be back. So then you start walking up the path alone until your thoughts stop completely. Because if any thoughts come up, then you just say, oh, hi, you must be a part of me. Like, love you, man. How are you doing? Would you be willing to wait at the bottom of this path while I go on this adventure alone and then come back? Because I just need some time to reflect. And if there's no emergencies going on, they will respect you and just gracefully offer to wait for you at the bottom of the path. So what's occurring in your psyche as you do that? That's your self separating from or transcending the various parts of it that are divided. That is the process of transcending. That is what transcendental meditation is. And I'm not just referring to the technique branded by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, but transcendental meditation as such. Mm-hmm. It's about experiencing the aspect of yourself that is eternal, that is harmonious, that is unified, that transcends everything in you. And it's really good for your spiritual development to transcend and then come back. But he chooses to do that in a way that it sounds like is really efficient. Like, as someone who's studying guided meditation and hypnotherapy and mystical experiences, I co-sign that 100%. That is a good way to transcend. You know, another way to do it is you could close your eyes and you could, this is a hypnosis that I've done for someone before. I put them at the top of a slide and I said, there's a table next to you. Put your stress on that table. You know, you actually hold on to your stress on purpose because it makes you feel purposeful to have stress. But for now, we're going to set it there. At the bottom of this whole journey, it's going to be waiting for you there. So don't worry. You're not abandoning it or anything. You're just taking a break from it. Put your stress there. Then the next one I say, now put your name here. It'll be waiting for you at the bottom, but just set it here. And then the next I say, now put your face here. It'll be waiting for you at the bottom. And I do that with cultural identity, color, gender, age. I do it with time. I do it with space. I do it with the family members. It's customized for the person, you know, what they're particularly attached to. But then at the bottom, when they go down the last slide, after going through that whole process, instead of hitting another platform that has another slide coming off of it, I say this slide goes on forever. Now you're suspended in nothingness. I let them stay there, and then wasn't that nice? And now the table is appearing. It has everything there for you again. Put it back on, but this time put it back on maybe a little bit differently. Organize things in a way that might work a little bit better for you. And so that's a way of inducing transcendence, right? Or in the TM model, the Transcendental Meditation technique designed by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, it's repeat one mantra. Just pick one sound that's a nice sound that's 2 or 3 syllables and allow it to repeat in your head subvocally like a catchy song until your attention goes all the way into the mantra and then through it until it experiences the eternal self. So these various techniques work because the self has infinite manifestations. And so there are infinite paths to get to the self through these imagination exercises, whether you do it guided meditation or hypnosis, or whether you do it independently. Mm-hmm. But his model is really impressive because it creates a way of transcending while honoring all the various parts of the self at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a mental health and spiritual practice. So yeah, I think that's a great way to do it. And he said that he's curious about doing studies to do brain scans on people using that practice and see if it does create the kinds of coherence that other meditation practices and that psychedelics induce, because he feels that the self does spontaneously emerge, not just when people do those IFS-inspired meditations, but when they even engage in IFS therapy. And another quick note about psychedelics, he would really like to use MDMA. He would like to do MDMA-assisted IFS because of the feeling of love, grace, acceptance, and openness that it induces. And he said that one of the ways that he has experienced the eternal self and felt that total transcendence was on ketamine. So I'm really excited about the future of IFS research and its intersections with psychedelic research. He even said about transcendence that it is beyond the wave and particle. And this was actually comical to me because he said, I practiced transcendental meditation, yet abstained from the Hindu mysticism in which it was embedded. And that statement is ignorant because transcendental meditation is based on Vedic scriptures that predate Hinduism and are honored by both Hindus and Buddhists. And Vedic scriptures are not just about, Veda means truth, they're not just about religious and mystical manners, they're about, matters. They're also about astrology and astronomy and health and general philosophy and how education should work and the process of human development, all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. It's an ancient system of knowledge. So he brushes off TM because in my opinion, he misunderstands what exactly the cultural and metaphysical implications of it are. But then he says something that is like straight out of the MIU manifesto, which is an MIU, if anyone's not familiar, Maharishi International University. So that's the school where I'm doing my undergrad, founded by the same guy who created Transcendental Meditation. Everybody practices that technique, and we study that technique and argue about it and talk about it. And so he says that there's something at the fundamental level of being, physically speaking, we're speaking about quantum physics here, that is neither a particle nor a wave. And he says that that is the self. And that struck me as so interesting because that is the mysticism that TM is embedded in.
Is that there's a part of you that's separate from, that's not a particle or a wave?
Okay, yeah. So John Hagelin is the president of Maharishi International University here in the U.S.
Okay.
He is a Harvard-trained quantum physicist. He did his dissertation on unified field theory. That's the set of physics theories that deal with the aspect of the physical world. I mean, it's beyond physical, but that word's a placeholder for now. That transcends all form. So the unified field, it divides itself into fermion fields, boson fields, and supergravity fields. Mm-hmm. And then those three kinds of quantum fields divide themselves into spin-type particles. And those divide themselves further and further until they become elements. And those elements combine in all these different ways to become organisms, right? But then at the same time, those quantum fields divide into the forces that everything is made out of, right? So electromagnetism, radioactive force, nuclear force, gravity.
Okay.
So the unified field, it becomes particles and it becomes waves. So this is one of these central tenets of the MIU school. The self that we experience in meditation is real, according to quantum physics. Mm-hmm. There is an aspect of being that transcends all dualities. And that sounds Eastern, right? And spiritual, but or mystical, I should say. But it is now a serious theory in the hardest physical science. And that is the most important idea out of MIU. We're teaching people systematically how to access the aspect of themselves that is at the most fundamental level. That is the self described by psychology. That is God described by the religions. That is the unified field described by physicists. Those are one and the same phenomenon. So now the connection I'm drawing to Schwartz's ideas in this book is I'm saying it's funny that he says he abstains from the mysticism that TM is embedded in, but that he believes that the self is the unified field that transcends the wave and the particle states. Mm-hmm. And that is the most important idea from the greatest academic at MIU. So that's what I was saying was funny.
Okay.
And, and actually it's a sin to say that John Hagelin is the greatest academic at MIU because before Maharishi passed away, he crowned a doctor named Tony Nader the king of the first sovereign nation of free peoples or something. Shit got really culty, right?
Right.
So technically, Tony Nader, the physician, who's a brilliant physician and a great man,
And a great king.
and a great not a king, not a king. He's a fucking genius. He mapped out how the 40, because the Vedas, that structure of that system of knowledge, they're organized into all of these different subsets of knowledge, and there's 40 of them total. And they theorize that the structure of the universe is reflected in the structure of the human physiology, because it's a basic Vedic principle that the microcosm reflects the macrocosm.
As above, so below.
Yes, as above, so below. So Tony Nader mapped the 40 physiological processes in the human body that make up the total physiological system, and how each one of them archetypally relates to one of the 40 subsets of knowledge in the Vedas, because they theory that the Vedas are a perfect representation of total knowledge. And so Tony Nader's a fucking genius, but he's not the king, and there's no First Nation of free peoples or whatever the hell Maharishi was talking about. But anyway, all that to say, I agree with Richard Schwartz, and I agree with the MIU model, and he is a lot more embedded in the Hindu mysticism of TM than he thinks. And I think that that's really exciting.
It is fun. It's fun when people that think they disagree agree.
It's awesome.
When they've like pursuing opposite lines and ending up at the same place.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's really cool. And that's all I got.
Cool. Well, I like it. The ideas of it very much resonate with me. Like I've done a little bit of that before. Like when you're trying to understand why you think something, try asking yourself things. I've done that a little bit before, but this sort of illustrated it in a much better way, and sort of it's like communication tools to better know how to communicate with your parts, with yourselves, because not everybody communicates the same way. And it's interesting to think about, like, that there's those different types of like people that are in you that have different takes on things. And I'll definitely be doing more of this.
Yeah.
It sounds very cool and very helpful. And you feel you've found it helpful? Like it's been really effective?
Dude, I mean, one of the really cool synchronicities that's happened in my life is I'm currently taking a class on Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell. I'm currently watching Chosen, the HBO series on Jesus.
Okay.
And I'm currently, and Matthew, my amazing friend, recommended this book to me. All of this happening at the same time has been really, really transformative because, first of all, the depiction of Jesus on the HBO show is really, really high quality and really inspiring.
Like, it's an HBO show.
It's HBO. They make great content, and it's really, really nice to see a good show about Jesus. And it's not an easy character to pull off. No. And the actor does an amazing job, and it's a better depiction of Jesus than I've ever been able to make up in my head. And so it's given me a better reference point to look to in my imagination when I imagine the voice of Jesus, when I imagine the presence of Jesus.
Yeah.
I have had visions of Jesus that impacted me, yet not been able to, on command, generate vivid images of what exactly Jesus would look like if I could have a conversation with him right here. And so I've been watching the show and practicing speaking to the parts of myself the way that I see him speak on the show. And it just works so well, dude.
Interesting.
Those parts of myself, they just open up. And I found myself speaking really, really effortlessly to some students last week. I was with a group of like 60 middle and high schoolers in Seattle for a field trip through the 21st Century program. Mm-hmm. And I had a group of boys that I was supervising, and we were walking around Seattle. So I was just responsible for a group of 6 rowdy high schoolers walking around Seattle. So my like inner parent was really on, you know?
Yeah.
And one of them turned out to have a knife on him. So I won't. Yeah, it's fine. He turned out to have a knife on him, and I was really, really, really friendly with them. You know, as soon as I saw that knife, I was like, "Give me that." He's like, "What?" I was like, "Give me that right now. That's not acceptable. You can't have a knife on a field trip. Give me that." And he handed it to me, and I was like, "It's all good, man." I put my hand on his shoulder, and I was like, "Hey, it's cool. I'm gonna give this back to you at the end of the day. not a big deal, you know, but you can't have that. He's like, why? I'm like, because we're funded through the ESD. So they're kind of like the school district. So it's the same thing as having it on a school trip. So because that morning I had done an IFS session on myself, and it had brought up some really heavy gender and sexuality themes. It had brought up some feminine aspects and some male aspects, like parts of me. It's like the feminine is like to yield to the process of life, and the male is like to impose on the process of life, and they're locked in this kind of something that's not yielding or imposing when they're fully integrated, you know?
Okay.
But they each kind of have those qualities. And so when I did the IFS, I'm sorry, this is slightly graphic, but you know, we're grown-ups, but when I tuned in to the energies that I was receiving, the parts that were asking for my attention, they were located in my genitals. And so my attention was brought there, and I was like, yeah, like what do you have to say? And there was masculine and feminine aspects of my sexuality that had things to say to me that I had never heard before. It's like, man, I'm so sorry that you guys have been just trying to tell me this and tell me that. Like, so had a great session, right? Got through, and actually I'm glad this came up because I forgot to mention this. You get a physiological sensation when you do this because you tune in, right? You tune into the feeling, and it's like there's something blocked in your body. Once you find out what they think they're protecting you from, what they're afraid would happen if they stopped protecting you, and what they'd like to do now that they realize they don't have to protect you anymore, you feel physically that spot open up, and it feels amazing. It just goes. So I could feel that from that center of my energy body or whatever exactly that is, just open up, and I could feel myself relax, and I felt just like, I still felt like a man, but I didn't feel like I was trying to be nurturing or assertive, you know? And so in that moment, normally I would have been really uncomfortable there, but I just went from like nurturing and friendly to like, I'm not playing. This is not acceptable. Give me that knife, to, hey bro, it's cool. And that's something that he says is like, if you're actively doing this work, you'll find yourself effortlessly shifting between selves that before didn't even have each other's phone number. And now they're like, you handle this. Now you handle that. It's like, that was 1 second ago. Yeah, but it's fine. You're on good terms right there. Boom, boom, boom. All right, I'll handle this part. And they just work themselves out. As what's his name? Carl Rogers says on Becoming a Person, he says, the various aspects of the self when left... I love it when I can't remember quotes halfway through a quote. I always do this. Basically, he says that when you
this is so good, and this is a really good one. Whenever
fool me twice. So basically, he said that when you don't impose yourself or manage the various parts of yourself, they effortlessly function in harmony. Carl Rogers says that in On Becoming a Person, and Schwartz is saying that same thing here. I felt that with those sexual aspects after doing that work and just hearing them. That's all I did was just hear them. And then be like, what do you want to do now? And they're like, just chill, dude. And like, just open up and relax and just feel light flowing through us because we're opened up now, and just we can just breathe.
Right. Because sometimes you'll be like, sometimes something will be upsetting you, and it's just upsetting that nobody can even understand why it's upsetting you.
Yeah.
Like, you're not even understood.
Like you trying to tell Courtney why you're upset back in the day.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
That's not going to do anything.
Right. That's our older sister.
Yeah.
And yeah, Raleigh is like a more rigid communicator, and Courtney is more of like a crazy person. And so yeah, you guys would get so fucking heated. I'm sure she didn't feel understood by you either, but particularly when you were trying to be understood and she just couldn't get there.
Sure.
It would really create this feedback loop.
Right. And maybe that's often, I mean, for sure it is going to be more likely to happen between men and women, because like the big example that comes to mind for me is like being in a fight with your significant other, but they don't understand why it's so upsetting. But if you go to someone, your buddy, that's also a man, and you tell it to him, he's like, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then like you feel better about it.
Right.
Even
That's true.
It's okay if
you
she doesn't
forgive
understand.
your spouse more because your homie understood what the fuck you said.
Because at least I'm sane. At least like I'm still tethered to something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not isolated. Yeah. And those parts of ourselves, they are experiencing that prison of being misunderstood. They feel totally isolated.
Yeah.
So, as Joe Rogan says, conquer your inner bitch.
Don't get vaccinated.
Yeah. So, I don't know what Joe Rogan's going through, but don't conquer your inner bitch. Listen to that motherfucker, dude. Night school.
Night school.